For decades, one number has quietly shaped the American dream of retirement. $1 million. It's the number people imagine when they picture freedom. The number financial advisors mention in articles. The number that feels like the finish line. Work hard, save, invest, and someday, reach $1 million. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people discover far too late. $1 million doesn't mean what it used to. In fact, for many Americans retiring today, or planning to, $1 million may only buy about 15 years of financial security. Not a lifetime. 15 years. Which raises a dangerous question almost nobody asks early enough. What happens if retirement lasts 25, or even 30 years? Because the biggest risk in retirement isn't running out of money quickly. It's running out slowly, quietly, year after year, until one day the math stops working. And by then, there's no career to fall back on. No easy reset. Just time. My name is Aiden. And today we're going to break down why the famous $1 million retirement goal may be one of the most misleading financial milestones people chase, and what's actually happening beneath the surface. The idea that $1 million equals retirement security didn't appear randomly. It comes from a simple mental shortcut our brains love. Psychologists call this anchoring. When people see a big number repeatedly, it becomes a reference point, even if the world around it changes. And for decades, $1 million was a massive amount of money. In the 1980s and 1990s, it really could support a comfortable retirement. Homes were cheaper, healthcare costs were lower, and most importantly, people didn't live as long. But the world quietly changed while the number stayed the same. Let's translate that $1 million into something more realistic: annual income. Most retirement planners use something called the 4% rule. The idea is simple. If you withdraw about 4% of your savings each year, your money has a reasonable chance of lasting around 30 years. So if you retire with $1 million, the recommended withdrawal is roughly $40,000 per year, before taxes. Now pause for a second, because this is where many people experience a moment of cognitive dissonance. $40,000 a year doesn't feel like millionaire status. In fact, in many parts of the United States, that income is below the national median salary. And that's before factoring in three forces that slowly erode retirement plans: inflation, healthcare, and longevity. These three factors are why so many retirees discover something unsettling. The goal they spent decades chasing was designed for a world that no longer exists. And the biggest shift of all is something most people actually celebrate. We're living longer than ever before. Which sounds like good news, until you realize what it means financially. Because retirement used to last 10 to 15 years. Today, it can easily last 30 years or more. And that completely changes the math. But the real danger isn't just how long retirement lasts. It's what happens to purchasing power during those decades. Because inflation doesn't destroy wealth overnight. It does something much more subtle. It slowly shrinks your future. And that's where the $1 million retirement myth starts to unravel. Imagine retiring today with exactly $1 million. You follow the traditional advice. Withdraw about $40,000 per year. Live modestly. Stay disciplined. At first, everything feels stable. But there's a quiet force working in the background that almost no one truly feels, until years later. Inflation. Not the scary headline version you see on the news. The normal, everyday kind. Historically, inflation in the United States averages around 3% per year. That doesn't sound dramatic. 3% feels harmless. But over time, it quietly rewrites the value of your money. Here's the mental model. Every year, inflation acts like a small leak in your financial bucket. One drop at a time. Individually, each drop is nothing. But after 10, 20, or 30 years, the bucket looks very different. Let's walk through what actually happens. If you retire today and need $40,000 to maintain your lifestyle, in 10 years, you'll need roughly $54,000 to buy the same things. In 20 years, it becomes about $72,000. And in 30 years, you'd need almost $100,000 just to maintain the exact same standard of living. Same groceries, same electricity bill, same life. Your expenses double and sometimes triple over the course of retirement. But your retirement savings, they don't magically double with them. This is where the psychology of retirement planning often breaks down. Because our brains think in static numbers. We imagine, I'll live on $40,000 a year. But life doesn't stay static. Prices move. Rent moves. Medical costs move. And once you stop working, your ability to adapt financially becomes much more limited. This creates what economists sometimes call the retirement squeeze. Early in retirement, everything everything feels comfortable. But slowly, the gap between income and expenses begins to widen. Not dramatically, just enough to force small compromises. Maybe you delay replacing the car. Maybe you skip a trip you planned. Maybe you cut back on helping family. Small adjustments. Until one day, 20 years later, the math looks completely different. And there's another factor most people underestimate even more than inflation. Because the single biggest expense many retirees face is something almost impossible to predict: healthcare. And healthcare costs have a way of appearing exactly when your financial flexibility is lowest. That's where the million-dollar retirement myth starts to face its biggest test. Not in the early years of retirement, but in the last decade of life. There's a moment in many retirees' lives that changes everything financially. It's not a market crash. It's not a bad investment. It's a medical event. And the uncomfortable reality is this: healthcare is often the largest unpredictable expense in retirement. According to multiple long-term studies, the average American couple retiring today may spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on healthcare over the course of retirement. And that estimate doesn't even include long-term care. This is where the retirement math becomes fragile. Because healthcare costs don't arrive smoothly. They arrive in spikes. A surgery, a chronic condition, a medication you suddenly need for the rest of your life. One year can look normal. The next year can completely reshape your financial plan. Psychologists sometimes describe this as tail risk blindness. Humans are naturally bad at planning for events that are unlikely but extremely expensive when they happen. So we assume things will stay mostly average. But retirement rarely behaves in averages. It behaves in surprises. And healthcare costs also grow faster than normal inflation. Historically, medical costs in the United States have risen significantly faster than general inflation, which means the financial pressure increases the older you get, exactly when you have the least control over it. But there's another layer to this problem that many people overlook: something called longevity risk. Because modern retirement is facing a strange paradox. We're living longer, but we're also spending more years needing financial support. Decades ago, many people worked until their mid-60s and lived into their early 70s. Retirement lasted maybe 10 years. Today, it's common for people to live into their 80s or even 90s, which means retirement can stretch 25 to 30 years. And that creates a psychological trap, because people plan retirement like it's a single phase of life. But in reality, retirement often unfolds in three completely different chapters: the active years, the slow years, and the care years. And each phase has very different financial demands. Understanding this three-phase reality is where the idea of a million-dollar retirement really starts to fall apart. Because the biggest expenses often don't happen at the beginning. They happen at the end. And very few people plan for that. Most people imagine retirement as one long, peaceful chapter. More free time, more relaxation, less stress. But in reality, retirement usually unfolds in three very different stages. And each stage quietly reshapes your financial needs. Phase 1, the active years. This is the retirement people dream about. You're healthy, you're energetic, you finally have time. So you travel, you visit family, you pick up hobbies you postponed for decades. Ironically, this stage can be one of the most expensive periods of retirement, because for the first time in your life, you have time to spend money. Many retirees discover something surprising here. They actually spend more in the first 5 to 10 years of retirement than they expected. Flights, experiences, helping children or grandchildren. This is the reward phase. But it's also the phase where many retirement portfolios start quietly shrinking. Phase 2, the slow years. Eventually, life slows down. Travel becomes less frequent. Spending stabilizes. This phase can feel financially comfortable. Expenses often decrease. But this calm period can create a false sense of security, because the biggest financial risks are still ahead. Phase 3, the care years. This is the phase almost nobody likes to think about. But statistically, many people will experience it in some form. Aging brings new realities. Mobility issues, medical treatments, assistance with daily tasks. Sometimes it's small support. Sometimes it's long-term care, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars per year, or more. And here's the critical problem. This phase often arrives after decades of withdrawals from your savings. Your portfolio is smaller, healthcare costs are higher, and financial flexibility is limited. This combination is what financial planners fear most. Because when retirement planning fails, it usually fails late in life. Not when you're 65, but when you're 85. And this brings us to the deeper psychological problem behind the million-dollar myth. It's not just a math issue. issue. It's a planning mindset problem. For decades, people have been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how much money do I need? The better question might be, what kind of life am I actually trying to fund? Because once you change that question, the strategy changes completely. And that's where the smarter retirement conversation really begins. The biggest problem with the $1 million retirement goal isn't just that it may not be enough. It's that it encourages people to think about retirement as a number. But retirement was never really about a number. It's about time. Time without a paycheck. Time when your health, priorities, and lifestyle will change multiple times. And time that could easily last 30 years or more. When people chase a single target like $1 million, they fall into a common psychological trap called goal substitution. Instead of solving the real problem, building sustainable income for decades, the brain focuses on a simpler milestone. Hit the number. Feel safe. But financial security in retirement doesn't come from hitting a single number. It comes from building a system that can survive uncertainty. Inflation, healthcare costs, market downturns, longer lifespans. That's why many modern retirement planners now think less about total savings and more about income streams. Investments that produce cash flow, flexible spending plans, delayed social security strategies, part-time work during early retirement, multiple layers of financial resilience. Because the most powerful retirement plan isn't necessarily the one with the biggest number. It's the one that can adapt. And ironically, understanding that $1 million might not be enough can actually be empowering. It forces a more honest question much earlier in life. What kind of freedom do you actually want? More travel, more security, more time with family. Once that vision becomes clear, the financial plan becomes clearer too. Because retirement isn't really an ending. It's just the longest financial chapter of your life. And planning for it deserves more than a single number people repeat without questioning. If this video helped you see retirement planning in a new way, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the psychology of money, wealth, and long-term thinking. And if there's one financial belief people repeat that you've always questioned, share it in the comments. Sometimes the most dangerous ideas are the ones everyone assumes are true.